Hello, welcome along to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're chatting to Samuel Burr. Samuel has worked as a TV executive, producing all sorts of reality shows, and he's got a new novel out. It's a tricksy mystery called The Fellowship of Puzzlemakers. We talk about some of the intricacies of the writing business, but what big deals mean, how much say you have, how do you actually get paid. Also, you can hear why spying inspired his characters, and we chat through how working in telly affected his writing.
It's almost as if I've got a camera and I'm sort of trying to decide where I'm going to point it. I think that definitely feeds into, from TV into books. But I think actually I always worked in unscripted television. So obviously we tried to plan stuff a bit, but the sort of beauty of documentary and reality is that you want to see what sort of naturally unfolds. And I guess I've tried to do the same thing with my book in that I plot to a degree. I like to know the main beats of the story, and I like to know roughly where I'm going, where I'm heading. But I do like to be surprised, and I like to really sort of try and listen to the characters and allow myself the freedom to move in different directions if I need to.
There is more with Samuel Burr in this week's Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along to the show. My name is Dan Simpson. This is Writer's Routine, where we take a look through an author's working day. Just dropped a brand new book review waffle update on the show on our Patreon page. If you'd like to get a little look behind the scenes, get to patreon.com/Writer's Routine. Thank you very much if you are already supporting us there. If you've never joined us before, every week, more or less, I bring you a different author, a different creative. We take a look through their working day. Doesn't matter at what stage they are, if they're some of the most famous writers around or if they are just getting there and publishing their debut. Everyone does it differently. And we just try to uncover the secrets, hopefully getting you a sliver of advice that you can steal and use through your own day. This week we're with Samuel Burr. Now, Sam has worked as a TV producer on unscripted shows like The Secret Life of 4-Year-Olds. Have you ever seen that? Such a brilliantly simple concept. We follow 4-year-olds, we see what they're up to, but it's just mind-bending how articulate they are and how it works. And that's really, come from the mind of Sam. And now he's got a book out. He's graduated from the Faber Academy, his writing has been shortlisted for Penguin's Right Now scheme, and his novel, The Fellowship of Puzzlemakers, was involved in an 8-way auction to publish the book, which finished with a 6-figure deal. It's a lot of numbers. Might be confusing. I know it is for me half the time, so we chat about the details of what that actually means. Because you might not know about the realities of the finances of writing. What does an advance mean? How do you pay off royalties and all of that? So we cover it, and I think that's really worthwhile. We cover that in this chat. The novel looks at Clayton Sumper, an enigma, a brilliantly named enigma, who was abandoned at birth on the steps of the Fellowship of Puzzlemakers and then raised by some of the sharpest minds in the country. Now, the hope is that he's learned from them. As to discover the secret of who he is and who he might be, he needs to crack one last puzzle. And the novel takes us on that mysterious journey. We talk about the details of actually writing such a tricksy book. I mean, there's so many small intricacies of this, like matching the chapter names to crossword answers to solutions for the puzzle that Clayton is working through. We chat about how Samuel got so deep into writing that. You can also hear how he works to a final sentence, why he uses the pomodoro technique, and how he gets ideas for his characters by spying. It's all on the way, and we dive into it as we always do with Samuel Burr chatting through what he sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
So I'm embarrassed actually, because I'm incredibly busy with various promotional things at the minute, and my desk is an absolute pigsty. So at the minute I have got a pile of proofs that I've got been very kindly sent that I'm they're staring at me and making me feel awful because I haven't quite got to them yet. I'm looking forward to getting to them. I've got lots of short reads. I've got one thing I really struggle with sometimes when I'm writing is I struggle reading novels when I'm in full writing mode. So I have lots of very short novels, lots of Claire Keegan, that sort of thing. because I find that I can sort of enjoy them and appreciate them and not get too het up. I think the thing is, when you compare your own work, when you're writing your own work, when you compare it to published novels, it can be quite a scary thing. So I've got a lot of short stories and short fiction. I've got a Joe Malone Dark Amber and Ginger, which I do occasionally just as a intense cologne that I will just spray myself with every now and then just to pep myself up. That's the trouble of being a writer. You don't ever go anywhere. You're just sort of sat at your desk. I was sort of in two minds whether to tell you about this, but I'm going to share it because we're in a safe space. I've got a collection of fountain pens in a fountain pen collection box. And I'm not ashamed about it.
I don't think you should be, but do they get used or are they just decoration?
They are. It's a bit embarrassing. They do get used. They don't get used enough, but I just have an absolute addiction of buying fountain pens. And so, it's got like 5 little drawers in it. And the first 3 drawers are fountain pens. And I've got ballpoints and roller balls. And then pencils. I'm sounding incredibly nerdy, but I do love sometimes breaking away from a laptop and not writing necessarily, but sort of brainstorming with pen and paper.
So it's a busy desk, a slightly cluttered desk. What is there maybe inspirational on the walls around you? Have you taken time making a conscious decision to be a writer? Has there been a thought that, I might need something to lift the mood around me?
Yeah, I've got a sign that says "applause, please." It's like a sort of studio sign, and I like that because it sort of feels like people are cheering me on. But otherwise, it is I should say that my desk is pushed up against the wall in between I'm in an open plan kitchen dining / lounge. And so it's sort of pushed up against the wall of those 3 areas of my flat. So it's not in its own space. And so I am very, very limited. And I think I'm creating excuses now, but it is why it's particularly cluttered. So I can't be too indulgent, and I haven't got like mood boards or, people do like, Post-it notes on the wall and stuff. I haven't quite got as enough, wall space for that. But, otherwise I just sort of, I like it to be a place where I want to be. And there's a couple of nice things. I've also got a really nice pink glass hourglass timer, which I think does 20 minutes. And that is something that I use every now and then. I just turn it and think, right, 20 minutes, go, and try and get as many words done as I can.
You said that there's no real Post-it notes around you because of the space. So how have you formed all of the planning detritus that you need?
I do have a sort of filing cabinet, which is sort of pushed up against the wall again, but sort of behind an armchair. And it's full of research. It's full of plotting notes. I do tend to, do a lot of that in notebook form. I do sometimes use the sort of index card model. I did do it once though, where I put it all out on the kitchen floor because it was only space that I had that was large enough. And I was really pleased with myself. I literally spent hours and hours and hours. And then I went for a wee and I came back and my cat had shuffled up all of the index cards and I hadn't taken a picture of it and I wanted to cry. So I haven't done that since. So I like the idea of the index card and the Post-it notes more than the actual reality of it. Mostly it's notebooks, and it's also an app I use called Trello. I know you like specific things on this podcast, so I'm going to give very specific and say there's an app called Trello, which I use. I'm not quite sure what the actual function of Trello is. I'm not quite sure what you're supposed to use it for, but I use it as a kind of digital note card thing. So you can sort of move around note cards really easily in various columns. So I've got different boards. So I've got a board for my first book, a board for my second book. I've got a board for like publicity, and then I just sort of gather notes and things that I know I need to remember. And it's just sort of very visual. You can sort of see stuff very easily. So I highly recommend Trello. And it's a good plotting tool as well. If you ever just want to move things around on a screen, it's a nice way of doing it.
We'll talk more about the plotting in just a sec, but it does make me wonder. You have worked as a TV producer, doing a lot of documentaries, and because of the planning that is required to make TV shows, a really keen awareness of where you're going, what you are going there to do. There can't be too much wasted time. How much do you think that helps out with plotting a novel and kind of storyboarding and seeing how things are going to end up?
I think it helps me in the way that I sort of visualize things. So when I think about my writing, I'm thinking about it in a very visual sense. It's almost as if I've got a camera and I'm sort of trying to decide where I'm going to point it. I think that definitely feeds into, from TV into books. But I think actually I always worked in unscripted television. So obviously we tried to plan stuff a bit, but the sort of beauty of documentary and reality is that you want to see what sort of naturally unfolds. And I guess I've tried to do the same thing with my book in that I plot to a degree. I like to know the main beats of the story, and I like to know roughly where I'm going, where I'm heading. But I do like to be surprised, and I like to really sort of try and listen to the characters and allow myself the freedom to move in different directions if I need to.
What do you find then the reverse of that? Because unscripted telly, I've never worked in it, but I would imagine that quite a lot of it is created, the narrative is made through the edit. Did you find the same with your novel?
Absolutely, yes. Editing has been a huge part of this book, and it's a huge part of my process, actually. Even when I'm writing, I'm sort of just constantly rewriting. I mean, every sentence as I go, I'm just rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, which I know is not the way to do it. I know everyone says, don't edit as you go, just get the words down. But I just can't not. I'm always tweaking. I think another thing that's been beneficial, sort of my experience in television and how I've sort of brought that into writing books, is pitching. Because my job as a producer predominantly was a development producer. So I worked in popular factual TV, and I was devising and developing and pitching new TV programs. So within that, I had to learn how to sell an idea really, really quickly, because it's an incredibly, incredibly competitive market. And you have to just instantly sell what's unique about your idea and excite a commissioner, or even before you get to a commissioner, excite your boss in the company. So that has been really, really crucial, actually. It's something I'm sort of quite comfortable with. I've been doing it for like 12, 13 years, maybe more. And so, yeah, when I was thinking about my book, I was thinking about how I was going to pitch it. It all started actually with my pitching in TV. I was terrified for years and years and years. I was so scared of pitching. Properly, like shaking knees sort of situation. And because it is quite daunting, it can be quite daunting anyway. If you're in the BBC headquarters and you're in a big room with 10 other people, and sometimes it's like that, sometimes it's not. But one thing I sort of learned to do is actually condense my pitch as much as I possibly could, so I didn't spend as much time pitching. So, and also that kind of is a win-win, because the commissioner doesn't want you to be whittering on for ages. Some people love the sound of their own voice in meetings, and you can really sense that. They love to sort of really set the scene, and actually commissioners don't want that. They just want to know what the idea is. So yeah, I got good at sort of condensing down my ideas so I could pitch them as quickly as I possibly could. And yeah, I think I've done the same, hopefully done the same with the book. I wanted it to be a book that excited people, and when they heard about it, and they'd want to pick it up.
Well, so many first-time authors have to learn that skill the hard way. Learn the idea that to get into a scene as late as possible, to tighten. But you came to writing with that skill already there.
Yeah, I think so. And I think even basic things like editing. There's a few shows that I developed that I ended up sort of editing as well. And when you're sat in an edit suite and you've got, reams and reams and, hours and hours and hours of material, it can be quite overwhelming, in the same way that writing a book can be overwhelming when you've got 90, 100,000 words. And it's about identifying what the sort of start, middle and end of the story is, what the themes are you're trying to sort of pull out, being really, really selective. So yeah, I think I've been lucky in that sense that, I had good training ground for that. And
you mentioned where you work. I mean, you live in London, and if you're like me, you're not blessed with tons of space. So how has that been with your partner? Kind of like you having your own little writing setup. How does that all work out? Are you both kind of happy with that?
You've hit a bit of luckily he's not here, but oh my goodness, it has been a huge challenge. I mean, luckily my partner is incredibly forgiving and has been immensely supportive, but I don't know if I would have been. My God. It is tough, actually, because as I don't want to sound sort of indulgent and say that I need the space, but I kind of do. I kind of can't just do it hunched over at my kitchen table. One thing I've done is I've started working outside a bit more, just so I can, also for my own sanity, so I can get outside my own flat. But yeah, it is a constant battle. And the book situation, at one point I had a storage unit in Hackney. This is so embarrassing. I had a storage unit in Hackney full of books because I just had nowhere else to put them. So yeah, the proof situation and the book situation, I can't stop buying. If it's not books, it's pens, and God, I need a bigger flat.
Well, because what you've hinted on there is you came to writing as being an author in a slightly unique way, in that it doesn't seem like you just kind of sat down one day, opened your laptop and started typing away. You made like a conscious decision to almost become as good as you can be before you started doing that, right? You went to the Faber Academy, and what, I guess, where did that choice come from, and what did you learn along the way?
It's interesting. I still remember to this day turning up at Faber and just feeling so nervous. Obviously, I'd been accepted on the course, and I remember queuing up at the reception, and I remember saying to the receptionist, I'm here for the, how to write a novel course. And she said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Samuel Burr." And she looked down at a list and she went, "No." And I thought, oh no, there's been some administrative error and I'm not supposed to be here. This is so embarrassing. In the end, it was just an actual mistake and I was meant to be on the course. But I turned up just feeling really sort of, I don't know. You might think that because I came from TV, I shouldn't feel so overwhelmed by it. But something about books and something about writing and publishing that does feel a little bit more exclusive than television. And I did feel really sort of out of place. And I remember thinking, oh God, have I read enough books? Have I, am I a good enough writer? What, am I going to get spotted basically? And, the course was amazing. I think the reason why I signed up for it is I just felt like in my TV career, I should say I've sort of stopped doing the TV for the moment. I'm sort of focusing on the writing the second book as well. But at that point in my TV career, I just sort of felt like I'd hit a bit of a wall. I'd had sort of quite a lot of success quite early on in my career, and that was wonderful. But then there was a few years just sort of in the run up to COVID where it just felt much harder. And it was a mixture of it actually being much harder because it had got more competitive, and with all the streaming services coming in, the landscape sort of changed. It was a bit of bad luck, and I think it was probably a bit of me losing my passion for it. And I'm someone that I can't do something by halves. So I remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to allow myself to sort of continue doing TV unless I continue to love it. And I knew that I loved stories. I knew that I loved reading. And the opportunity at Faber came up, and I thought, I'm going to go for it. And it was at a really interesting point in my life where I felt like I was really excited to learn. Like I can't tell you how exciting each session was. I just loved it. I loved going to Faber. I loved sitting with all those other people and talking about books and, dissecting great writing. I loved it so, so much. I had a fantastic teacher, Sarah May, who's a brilliant author as well. And she's just one of those amazing people that, saw something in me and really supported me through the process of writing my first book. But was also just a brilliant teacher that sort of taught me so much about how to construct a novel. So, yeah.
Did it help you with the moment that we all have when we write a first book, when we get very disillusioned with how tough it ends up being, because you get into the baggy middle, you're 40,000 words in, suddenly you've lost the thread of what you originally thought the story would be. How did it help you navigate through that?
I think one thing it taught me, TV taught me that, basically my job was learning how to fail because my job was, anyone that works in TV will tell you the sort of hit rate in TV is laughable. So, 96% of everything I worked on wouldn't go anywhere. And so when you've done that for as long as I have, you do develop a slightly thick skin to people saying no and people rejecting you. So I think that definitely helped, particularly in the later stages when I was sort of putting my work out. I didn't really worry about it too much because I was so used to putting ideas out there and getting rejected. But it is different. Constructing a TV show and writing a book is a completely different thing. And I think the thing that's the biggest difference is that you're doing it entirely on your own. And that is a good and a bad thing. I mean, one of the things that I loved about writing a book was that in TV, I need, in order for one of my TV projects to be signed off, I need 10 people to give it the green light. I need a massive, £1 million budget. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. That idea that I've got in my head, as brilliant as it might be, as excited as everyone might be about it, it's not going to be created. It's not going to be on the screen unless I got all those things lined up. Whereas with a book, actually, all you really need, and making it sound really simple, but all you really need to actually at least make something is a pen and a paper or a laptop. You just need to do it. You just need to start. There is a sort of easier entry level to it. And I think that for me was a hugely appealing quality of writing, was that actually I knew by the end of it, even if it didn't get published, it would be a physical thing that existed in the world.
But the reverse of that, and why collaboration creatively is really beneficial, is that sometimes you need someone to tell you that this ain't working, that this ain't good enough. And if you're on your own, there's a worry that you get so into your own idea, you can't actually tell if it's good anymore. How did you contend with that?
I would say that the idea landed in quite a profound way, the top line idea of my book anyway. And I was immediately very excited. Now, I do get excited about a lot of my ideas. And sometimes I wake up the next day and think, what was I thinking? But actually, with this one, and something I've been thinking about recently as I approach my second book, the idea, the excitement that I had for the idea maintained all the way through the entire process. I didn't lose that excitement for what I thought it could be. That doesn't mean to say I thought it was brilliant all the way through. I really didn't. There was many moments where I was in tears and hated what was on the screen, but only hated it because I knew what the potential of it was. I knew what I wanted to create was going to be brilliant. It was just getting it to be brilliant. And I think for a long, long time, as is the process of writing any book, it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. And so it's just about working on it and working on it and working on it until you get it to a point. Someone said to me once that a book is never finished, it's just ready. And I think that was a really useful thing that someone said to me, that actually there was a moment where my editors had to literally prise the manuscript out of my hands because I just would have kept going and going and going. But yeah, I think the excitement, the idea that I did have, I knew it was good. I knew that I had other people, obviously I am writing myself, but I had the other classmates at Faber, had the tutor, and quite quickly I got an agent as well, which did make a difference too. So I was signed on a partial, which meant that I hadn't actually finished, or I hadn't delivered the full manuscript to the agent when she signed me. She'd read the first 20,000 words. So I had her sort of checking in with me, and that was a really useful thing to have as well as a motivator, to know that I wasn't just writing it and no one was going to read it. I had someone that was sort of checking in with me saying, when's it going to be ready, sort of thing. So
did you know that was an unusual thing to do, to send it off to agents without having finished it at the time?
So basically it came about. So at the end of the Faber Academy course, your work gets published in an anthology. So it's like a 700-page book that features, a biography of each classmate and a sort of synopsis of their book and the first chapter, or at least I think the first 1,000 words of the book. And so my work at the end of the course was sent out in this anthology, and I was approached by my agent who, was really, really keen. And I sort of was really honest and said, look, this is where I'm at. And she said, just send me what you've got. And that's how it happened. I wouldn't have sent it otherwise. But it was quite an unusual situation. I think it's not. And also, I mean, as brilliant as it was and as grateful as I am to my agent for that experience, and it was, I think on the whole, just a really positive thing, it did put a lot of pressure on me because suddenly I was writing a book that someone was waiting for. And that does change the dynamic when you're when you're at your desk, and it felt like a bit of a job. So actually at that point I sort of stepped away from TV. COVID was happening. Everyone was getting furloughed. I wasn't being furloughed. And I think if COVID hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have stepped away. But I basically decided that I could sort of do it without anyone noticing. I could sort of step away from TV and focus on my writing for a while. And no one would think any less of me for it, because lots of people were out of work. And yeah, it was kind of one of the weird few perks of the situation, was it sort of, I guess it made everyone think about what was their priority, what was important to them. And for me, suddenly the book became very, very important to me. It was a very strange period. And I look back now and think, did I enjoy that process as much as I should have done? Because it was kind of magical and brilliant and very exciting. But it was also really terrifying, because suddenly this thing that I had written was going to get published, and I realized it was going to get published in quite a big way. It was going to be, there were people who were going to invest a lot in it. And so again, that sort of, as someone who can have huge wobbles with confidence, I struggled through that process. And the other thing to say about the auction process is that you sort of imagine David Dickinson, but sadly it's all done on email and sort of various meetings and things, and it goes on for quite a while. I mean, it probably took a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, and there was this awful feeling where like it was so tantalizingly close. The deal, all these publishers were really interested. I was hearing all this exciting stuff, but nothing was signed until it was signed. And so it felt like I was in this weird sort of dream-like situation where this sort of dream was about to come true, or at least I hoped it was. I just worried that something might happen, something might happen, and they might all change their mind. And then I'd sort of, how would I ever recover from that? But luckily it didn't. Luckily it all went through. And it was amazing. It was so exciting. And I think as long as you don't sort of take it for granted. And I remember saying that in every meeting. I hated the idea that publishers might think that I was sort of just thinking this was normal and taking it for granted. I'd say to everyone, I know how lucky I am. Thank you so much. So yeah, it was incredible. And of course it comes with its own pressures, but I'm not gonna complain about it really.
And without getting too deep on the finances, having a 6-figure deal it doesn't mean that you wake up and there's hundreds of thousands of pounds in your account, right? It means that covers everything that happens for the book, like all the marketing. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, this is one of the things that I've learned at Faber. It was one of the few sort of very practical bits of information that is really quite crucial, which people don't really talk about, which is how you get paid as a writer. And I did not know until I was at Faber that you get paid in quarters. So an advance fee is broken down into you get a quarter on when you sign the deal, when you sign the contract. You get a quarter on the publication day of your hardback, and on the publication day of your paperback. I'm now thinking I may have got it wrong. I think it might be 3. It's either 3 or 4. I can't remember. I should know that. And sometimes it does differ. I think publishing houses sometimes will tweak it to different ways. But it's really important to know that sort of thing, because, yeah, you might assume that the money just lands in your account and you have to sort of make it work for however many years. But actually it does, to stagger it like that is actually quite useful. You have to, you only make money on top of that after that advance has been paid off, right? And it's paid off at quite a small rate of the books you sell. Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, you only earn royalties when you've earned out your advance. I don't know why I'm saying this, because obviously I haven't done that yet, but my book's not out yet. But apparently that is the way it goes. Yeah, you have to earn out your advance to start earning royalties.
God, it always makes me wonder then why people give loads of books away to friends and family. No, to buy it. The only way I make money is if you buy the thing. Well, listen, let's talk about the day then, Samuel. So the show is writer's routine. Just tell us about the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed on a day when you are writing. How does the entire thing look?
It normally looks like I struggle out of bed. I sit at my desk quite quickly. I end up probably doing emails and sort of talking at the minute anyway. I'm sort of, when I'm writing at the minute, I'm dealing with stuff from America often that's coming overnight, or various other places. I'm sort of catching up on my emails, things that I feel I need to respond to, also a bit of social media stuff that might have come through overnight. And then I'll sit down at my desk. What I like to have is, in one of my many, many notebooks, I like to have a sort of 3 or 4 line summary of what it is I'm writing, or at least the main beats of what I'm writing, that I can just glance at sometimes and just think, am I doing that? Am I hitting those beats? Because sometimes I can get very distracted, and I almost like, ticking off these things on the paper. So I really make sure I'm sort of getting from A to B. Sometimes for me, when I'm sitting down to write at my desk, the first thing I write is the final sentence of the scene or the chapter that I'm working on. And that might sound sort of slightly counterintuitive, but for me, I like to know where I'm going, and I like to know where I'm where I'm going to. So by having a final sentence on the page, it weirdly makes the process of writing everything else slightly simpler.
Very quickly, does that final sentence stay the same?
Sometimes it changes. No, yeah, sometimes it will change. And obviously, my God, the editing process, things change a lot. But it doesn't really matter if it does change. What matters is that I've got to the point where I want to get to. And ultimately, I've got words down on the page. I have to admit, I'm an incredibly slow writer, and I drive my publisher mad, I think, because I'm so slow, and I'm a huge perfectionist. And like I say, I do edit as I go. So sometimes the biggest challenge for me is actually just getting words down on the page. And any little tricks that I can do to sort of improve that and get words down as quickly as I possibly can, then that's what I end up doing.
So you've sat down, you've started writing, you've got the first sentence down, you are a slow writer, then what happens?
Depending on how freely the words are coming, if I'm struggling, I've got a little digital stopwatch, which I set it to 25 minutes, and I do the sort of pomodoro method, which I have learned. I have to say, this is one of the very many tips I've learned on this podcast. The pomodoro method has been a bit of a game changer for me. So I can't remember who it was. I know it's been mentioned quite a few times with different authors, but someone mentioned this very early on. And Dan, I've been listening to this podcast for many years. I'm probably your biggest fan. And I remember even when I was at the Faber Academy telling everyone, you should listen to this. We were talking about writing routines. I was like, there's a podcast called Writer's Routine. Everyone should listen to it. And so, I picked up that tip about the Pomodoro method, which is essentially breaking down a bigger task into 4 chunks of time. And those times are 25 minutes, 25 minutes, 25 minutes, 25 minutes, with 5 minutes in between each of those sections to sort of rest and relax. I end up going on Twitter in those 5-minute breaks. I'm not going to lie. But those 25 minutes are really good, because what it does is it forces you to get words on the page. It forces you to not get distracted, which is a huge obstacle for me. If you've got on your timer, if you've got 8 minutes left, you kind of think to yourself, oh, do you know what? I can wait 8 minutes before I check Twitter. I'll write for another 8 more minutes. And another thing for me is that I wouldn't say I'm a competitive person, but I can be quite competitive with myself. So I'll write on my notebook, or the same notebook I've got the sort of summary of what I'm writing. I'll write, I'll have 4 boxes, and I'll just write how many words I get done in each of those 25-minute slots. And I can be quite competitive with myself. If I sort of see that, I've only written 360 words, I'll sort of try and pick it up a bit on the second one. So yeah, that's been another thing. A big thing for me is just productivity, getting words down. And yeah, Pomodoro has been quite important for that.
I guess it's similar to why you write the last sentence at the beginning. It's somewhere to aim for. If you've got 25 minutes, right, I just need to do that, and then we can reassess. So is there an aim for every day when you sit down? How long would you like to get? How long are you trying to work for? Is it a word count thing? At
the minute, I have to be honest, I haven't had a full writing day for quite a while. And that is sometimes personal stuff that's, things in the diary that you've just got to do, or sometimes it's more often than not, it's, publicity stuff for the first book. It'll be a meeting or a phone call or a Zoom. And so the day, as much as I would love to say that I spend 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day of the week writing, you have to be a bit more flexible than that. So I'll try and do at least sort of 2 lots of the Pomodoro. And I find that, if I'm honest, after lunch, 3-4 o'clock, I start to sort of flag when it comes to writing. And actually, I'm better off doing other writing stuff, which can be, filling in tax forms for foreign publishers, or, social media stuff or marketing or whatever it might be.
And you publish your first book. Well, it's out shortly. writing a second book, and you listen to the show, so you are aware and conscious of how different people do it. What have you kind of learned along the way that you're thinking about maybe tweaking in the future?
I think what I've realised is that I do write in a very particular way. As much as I would love to change the way I write, I think it's maybe wishful thinking. I think actually I sort of need to just sort of lean into the way I write and sort of find little tricks to make it work better for me. I've learned that definitely the morning is the time for me to write. In fact, I was getting up when I was working in TV and writing at the same time. I was getting up at 4:45 in the morning. I have to be honest, I haven't done that in quite a while. But 4:45 in the morning, I'm writing from 5 till 7 a.m. and then going off and doing my TV job. And actually, those 2 hours were always they were the most productive. And two, they were the most creative and the most fulfilling in terms of what I was creating, because I wasn't being as critical with my work. And also I was just in a slightly sort of half asleep, dreamlike state where, I feel like the ideas came on more easily. And, the story took slightly different shapes. I think actually some of my favorite scenes in the book, came about in those very early morning writing sessions. So that's been a really good thing. I think I need to sort of go back to that. It's difficult at the minute because I'm sort of doing various things in the morning, but I will get back to it. And I think the other thing to say is that I'm very, very lucky in that I've built a sort of network of other writer friends who are being published this year too. And it can be incredibly lonely writing a book. And really difficult, just to be sat alone with your thoughts and the characters in your head. I mean, it's, if you actually think about it, it's quite mad. So having people to speak to sort of check in with, to run ideas through has been really, really important for me. I think when I started writing, I thought I was an introvert, and I actually think I'm not. I think I do rely on others. I do need sort of, conversations throughout the day to sort of keep me going. That's been a sort of really interesting part of the process. I think writing a book does teach you a lot about yourself. It sort of forces you to understand how you work, how you operate, what you think, what your fears are, what your dreams are. I feel like I sort of know myself a lot better at the end of having written a book than I did before, which is quite a nice thing, really.
Let's talk about the tech then. We get quite geeky. I mean, you started it quite nerdy with fountain pens, right? So what do you write with, and what fonts do you use, Sam?
So, I love fonts. So I do have Scrivener, but I find it makes me feel a bit sick. And all the functions and all the stuff, I find it distracting and off-putting. So sorry, this isn't an advert for Scrivener, but I do use it occasionally. What I tend to do is I end up writing in Scrivener. I start writing in Scrivener because I think this is the way to do it. I can be really organized. And then I end up copy and pasting what I've written and putting it into Google Docs. And there's something about that interface, the simplicity of it, that calms me. And also it means that what I can do is I can look at it on different devices, which might sound a bit strange, but I will be working predominantly on my MacBook laptop. And if I'm working on Google Docs, I've also got the app on my phone. So I can, if I'm, running to a meeting, I actually did this yesterday. I was writing something in the morning, went to a meeting, and on my way to the meeting, I opened up the file that I'd been working on that morning, and suddenly I just saw it in a slightly different way, and I was able to sort of cut out words and edit. I mean, there we go again, me editing as I go. But I think that has been a really useful thing. So I do write in Google Docs predominantly, and I love Georgia. I write in Georgia quite a lot.
It's very popular.
And then my editor will then change it back to Times New Roman, which really upsets me. I hope she's listening to this. Please stop doing that. I can't bear it.
I might get into the Georgia hype,
It's lovely. It's lovely fun. And it's sort of the other thing I do is I set my margins. Jesus God, this is embarrassing. I set my margins to look like a book. So I have particularly wide margins, as you would in a hardback or paperback book, so that what I'm writing, because I'll be doing it for so long, years, what I'm looking at on the screen looks a bit like a book. rather than a word processing document. That's something I do, which is really lame. I think that's about it tech wise. When I've got about 7 different keyboards. Every now and then I just switch it up and I think, no, need a new keyboard, different feel. And this one I've got actually the Logitech. MX keys. The Logitech MX keys, highly recommend. Got slightly dipped concave keys that feel lovely in the finger and wonderful to type on.
We're back with more from Sam in just a second. I wanted to pop by just to say thank you for listening to the show and to say if you are enjoying it, if you've learned anything along the way in over 310 episodes now, if there is anything that has just helped the way that you write, you can help us out. The best way to do that is by backing us over at patreon.com/writersroutine. There's a few tiers that you can support us over there. And for it, you get merch, there is bonus content, and there is even a way for your book to sponsor this show. So if you have published something that definitely deserves more fanfare, let me sing, shout, and, well, talk about it a lot on the podcast for you. It doesn't require a lot, just a few dollars a month. It helps us carry on. It helps me keep bringing you these chats with the best authors around as often as I can. Patreon.com/writersroutine. I'd love to see you there. If you enjoy the show, if you'd like to see it carry on, it's the best way that you can help by becoming a backer. Just a few dollars over at patreon.com/writersroutine. Let's get back into it with Samuel Burr then, chatting through his new novel, The Fellowship of Puzzlemakers. It's out right now. It was inspired by a documentary that he once made in a retirement home and then helped along the way by spying on strangers whilst at the Faber Academy. We chat through the novel, about working towards a final sentence and how much his tricksy ideas got in the way of actually writing the thing. And we pick things up, talking through the very first idea he had for this brand new novel.
I had started writing another book. I'd probably got maybe 20,000 words into a novel that was about a very vivacious, eccentric lady in her 80s who had won a lot of money. It's based on an article I'd read in a newspaper. She'd won a lot of money from playing bridge, the card game, and she travelled the world taking part in competitions, and she'd won huge sums of money. And I was really inspired by the sort of that story, and I ended up writing a book that was centred on her and on a younger sort of lodger that lived with her. And I really enjoyed it. And I quite quickly learned that I loved writing sort of slightly eccentric characters and very British characters. And I loved the idea of sort of including a bit of gameplay within the writing, if that makes sense. So the sort of the bridge playing and the card game sort of played a part of the story. But it was just a bit limiting. So I sort of quickly dumped it. And I turned up at the Faber Academy, having a few weeks before I started seen a documentary on BBC 4. It was Saturday night. It was about 11 o'clock at night. And, because I'm me, I was watching BBC 4. And it was a program, I think it was called something like The Secret Life of Crosswords or something like that. It was a program that only BBC 4 would broadcast. But it was about sort of this very small niche world community of crossword compilers, professional crossword compilers. And there was something instantly fascinating and charming and actually quite funny about the idea of people who had sort of committed their lives to sort of having fun and taking it deadly seriously. And there was a lady in it called Ruth Crisp, who I became a bit obsessed by, who was sort of the lone female in the midst. So I think she was at the Times, and she was a female compiler sort of operating in a man's world, very old fashioned broadsheet press that she was working in. And I loved the idea of a lady, a genius lady sort of working in those circles. So Pippa, who's one of my protagonists, isn't based on this lady at all, I should say. But I guess there was a spark then, and I got a little bit excited. I turned up at Faber, and I have to be honest, I had a real panic because I thought the course was going to be like quite slow going, and sort of they were going to you would develop ideas together. And literally within 10 minutes, our tutor was like, "Okay, let's all pitch out what our books are about." And I thought, God, I don't actually know what my book's about yet. But I had this thing about puzzles and puzzle makers. I like the idea of, I remember writing down in my notebook, puzzles infused in prose, a book you can read and you can play. And I remember thinking that was something that just really excited me, the idea of writing a book where I could infuse some of the puzzles within the story to sort of unlock a mystery. And so I turned up at Faber, and when I was asked to pitch my novel, I sort of pitched this very strange idea about a group of puzzle makers all living together in a big old crumbly house. And everyone just thought I was utterly mad. And then the next week, Sarah, our tutor, was brilliantly suggested that we all go out around Bloomsbury and just spy on someone to create a character, sort of character building workshop. And some people literally follow people onto tube trains and did it the whole shebang. I just went into the sandwich shop next door to Faber. I just sat in this little Italian sandwich shop, and I thought, I'm just going to sit here and see who comes in, and which felt a bit more sensible. And then, all of a sudden the bell went on the door, and these 4 men walk in, and they're all wearing anoraks, and one of them has like a pile of newspapers under his arm. Another guy's carrying like a little desk bell, and they sit down, and I hear one of them say, "Right, Derek, do you want to have a go at 6 across?" And they're a crossword club, and they had all the grids out on the table, and every time someone got a clue right, they'd ting the bell. And I just remember thinking, oh, this is it. I love this, But what was really embarrassing is that I had to then go back to Faber and say, you never guess what, I've just bumped into a crossword club next door. But I actually had, and I've even got a photo to prove it.
Yeah, sure you have. We'll get more into the big plotting in just a second, but these types of books, like puzzles within novels, I mean, when you had this idea, there can't have been that many around. Now they're slightly more in vogue with the rise of cozy crime, and Janice Hallett, who I know has given you a glowing blurb for your book, is kind of does really well with these types of more unique stories. And I read a good one by a guy called Dan McDorman. How much does books that are out, books that are popular, like influence and slightly creep into what you do, just the knowledge that they're there and they're doing well?
Weirdly, the timing of it all was quite strange in that puzzles are as old as time, and everyone has been into puzzling. So, but what sort of happened was when I was writing, the course basically got stopped at Faber. It got postponed because of COVID. And if you remember, COVID happened and Wordle became a really big thing. And so I was sort of conscious that, people seem to really like this. And I think there's sort of, you can sort of easily understand the appeal of puzzling during lockdown because it was just a great distraction. And when you're doing a puzzle, you're not really thinking about anything else, which is a really nice part of it. So that happened, and I remember thinking, this is quite good. This is quite good timing. I wasn't aware of it. But what I didn't want people to think I'd written a book based on the success of Wordle, and I'd done it really quickly. Because I think when we went out on submission, it was like, it was the Wordle moment. Everything was Wordle. And I remember sort of saying to my agent, I hope people don't think I've just rushed this book based on the success of Wordle. But actually, it was just really coincidental and very lucky, really. But I guess one thing I'm always interested in, and because I was a popular factual TV producer, my job was, there's lots of producers that make documentaries, very high quality documentaries that win lots of awards that might not necessarily bring a massive audience. My job was to try and come up with ideas that did pull an audience and would appeal to the masses. And so I think I do have quite populist taste, and I think it's just the way I naturally think. I'm interested in stories that will appeal to lots of people that feel sort of universal. It's interesting, coming back to my second book, I've decided that I love writing stories, big stories in small worlds. So the idea of universal stories about very, specific, niche, sometimes very British, eccentric worlds might be my thing, I think. So, that's something I'm sort of conscious of. I think I am quite conscious of it, and I'm always interested in mass books that have mass appeal that suddenly take off. I've just bought the new Fourth Wing book, the first Fourth Wing book, which I'm not at all a fantasy reader by any stretch. But when a book gets that many readers and does as well as it does, I can't help but be interested in it, and I want to know why it's done so well. So, I think I probably was conscious of it, but perhaps not as conscious as it might appear on the surface.
And Well, I need to, again, just before the plotting, Clayton Sumper is a brilliant name. Wait. How did, this is such a trite question, right? But how did that land on your desk? I mean, I'm so obsessed by the idea of character names particularly. How much kind of brain tickling did that involve?
I'm sort of cautious to answer. So I think Clayton as a name is someone that I met, and I should say that if they're out there and listening, I met them very briefly, and this makes it sound really serious. It's not at all. I just worked with him, and I loved the name. I remember turning to my colleague and saying, "God, what a cool name, Clayton. I've never heard that before." And he was sort of, sometimes people might say Clay. So that was in my head. I just love the name. I think it's quite distinctive. Stumper, obviously, he's the puzzle they've never been able to solve. So there's a sort of bit in the novel where we sort of refer to that. But yeah, Clayton Sumper. I love names that you can abbreviate, that you can shorten. It just makes them feel more real to me somehow. And particularly in dialogue, when you've got characters talking to each other, I love it when people refer to Clayton as Clay.
Wow, yeah, and Stumper, right? You get stumped by a puzzle. I really enjoy that. So you've got this idea, you've gone to the Favour Academy, you've had to very quickly pitch it. You want there to be puzzles ingrained into this story. You mentioned earlier that you like to have an idea of what's happening, but you are willing to be dragged and to go on flights of fancy. Like, how much did you know about this before you sat down to properly write the thing?
I knew that I wanted Pippa, who's the founder of the Fellowship of Puzzlemakers. I wanted her to be a cruciverbalist, which means she's a crossword expert. And I knew that I wanted to aim towards having a crossword grid at the heart of the novel, that each of the clues would become a chapter. I think sometimes the way that I think about my ideas is actually, it's a way of breaking down what is sometimes a very overwhelming task into slightly more manageable chunks. And for me, knowing that I had a 13 by 13 grid and 20 odd clues, and using those 20 odd clues to sort of create, the themes for each chapter and the sort of quest that my character was going to go on, it sort of sounds like a lot of work. But it also,
it does.
It does, yeah. But it also makes it, for me, feel a bit easier, because it feels like at least I've sort of created my own shape and I know what I'm aiming for. Whereas if I'm just writing a story where I'm not quite sure where it's going to go, I don't know how many chapters it's going to be, how many characters, it just feels a bit sprawling and I can get quite overwhelmed and I overthink stuff. And so actually by limiting my choices and constricting myself sometimes, I find that slightly freeing.
And was that early on? As in, if you know that the answer is going to be the names of the chapters, do you have to work backwards or kind of do it all at the end?
Dan, I cannot even begin to tell you what a nightmare this was.
Well, you just said, oh, well, I know I might be making it hard for myself. Like, yeah, you probably are.
There was a moment where I thought, oh God, no, I've bitten off more than I can chew now. I knew roughly what the themes were going to be, what the quest was going to be. And there was a question mark over whether it was going to be a cryptic crossword or a quick crossword. Now, one thing I learned during the writing process was that in America, cryptic crosswords don't exist. So I was sort of
really?
Yeah, they don't have them. They're huge. Crosswords are huge, but they're sort of our equivalent of a quick crossword. They're sort of more
general knowledge
and general knowledge, exactly. And so I was conscious of that, but I certainly wasn't thinking when I was writing the book, well, when this gets published in America. But when it is, I got an American deal, and fortunately, my brilliant editor Caitlin is American but lives in London, so she's been a real part of the editorial process with my UK editor Charlotte, and so it's been really lovely. It means that we've been really able to work together very closely, and it actually comes out in America next week. And but during the editing process, I was conscious that the cryptic clues weren't going to make sense to the Americans. And you can sort of get away with a bit of that, with a bit of explanation. But what you don't want to do is annoy readers. You don't want them to think, I don't know what you're talking about, and this is really frustrating. And so there was a moment where the American editor said, well, we might have to do a different crossword for our manuscript. And I thought, no, no, we're not going to do that. And actually it worked out quite well, because my American editor said to me, which was very, very useful, she said, this has to be guided entirely by the characters. So just think about, what would Pippa do? So my story is the story of Clayton Sumper. It's a young man who's grown old before he's grown up. He is bequeathed this puzzle when the founder of the Fellowship, Pippa, passes away. And that promises to sort of reveal the mystery of how he came to live there, because he was abandoned at birth on the front steps. So that's the sort of mystery at the heart of the Fellowship. And this puzzle promises to sort of help Clayton piece together the clues and to find out where he's come from and also where he's going in his life. The puzzle that he is bequeathed during this very sad sort of moment in his life, when his sort of main maternal presence of his life, Pippa, passes away, the sense of it being a sort of end of a chapter and, start of a new era. This puzzle that she bequeaths is a crossword. And what I love about Clayton is that he's the odd one out, because he was sort of abandoned at birth outside the Fellowship. He's not a puzzle maker. In fact, he's not even a genius. He's not even that bright. He doesn't think he's that clever. And so that was the thing that I leaned into. I thought, well, hang on. Actually, there's a moment in the very first scene, first chapter, where Pippa's in the coffin. She's sort of lying there, and there's a very emotional moment with Clayton, and he takes out that day's cryptic crossword from the paper that he's saved, and he folds it up and puts it inside the coffin. And he reflects on the fact that he's never been great at crosswords, particularly the cryptics. If he was honest, he's never been able to solve one in his life. And that's the thing that makes him unique and special. And so obviously, she wouldn't leave him a puzzle that she knew he couldn't solve. So I ended up going with a non-cryptic crossword, because that was what she would have done for Clayton. And it also helped that that's what America wanted too. So, yeah.
And it makes it much easier to write questions, I think, for a non-cryptic one. I just think, and also cryptic crosswords are really divisive. Like, I really enjoy them, but they are one of those things where if you say to someone who can't do it, oh, come have a go at this, I can kind of teach you. I think immediately the shutters go up, and a lot of people are like, no, there's no way I'll be able to do that. Like, they are quite intimidating.
Yeah, they're intimidating, exactly.
Well,
I was conscious that with the book, that was a really important point for me, is that I wanted the book, and of course it's called The Fellowship of Puzzlemakers, and puzzles do play a part in it, but like I said earlier, it's a sort of a story about a very specific world, but a very universal story overall. And actually, I didn't want to put off people who might think, well, I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm not very good at puzzles. I won't enjoy that. But it is just a novel, and the puzzles are a nice added bonus if you enjoy doing them. But yeah, I was sort of conscious I didn't want to put people off if you weren't a sort of ardent puzzler.
I'm taking a look at your blog, and last May, you published something called A Year Until Publication. I will note that it's not really been updated, but anyway, on the picture of that is a picture pretty much of your front cover. Now and I had no clue things worked that far in advance. Like, I've known authors who kind of don't know their front cover until it's a month to go. What's it been like this last year, having everything set in stone, waiting for your first novel to be released? And to carry on writing, to have this baby there, and you've got to work on other stuff.
Yeah, it's sort of been both brilliant and slightly nerve-wracking in that I feel like I've been waiting for forever for this book to come out. And the first question that everyone asked me, when I announced that I had a book deal and I was going to be writing a book, or that I was going to be publishing a book, everyone says, why does it take so long? Because this was in 2022, early 2022. And I was having to say, so it will be coming out in May 2024. And people were just like, but have you not written the book? And I'm like, yeah. I think what I'm really, really grateful for is that my publisher decided to set that date and to really invest in the sort of build-up campaign. And they've done just the most incredible work. Yeah, when the cover came through was kind of extraordinary moment. Obviously that gets tweaked and tweaked. So I think that version a year ago is now slightly different, but it's the same sort of thing. Yeah, it's an amazing, amazing moment, but it does, again, just increase the pressure, and it does just draw out what is already a very emotional and stressful experience. I mean, it is. There's no one, I've never met anyone that's published a book and hasn't said that it's incredibly stressful. Obviously, it's an enormous, enormous privilege too, but it can feel incredibly overwhelming. But like I said, I've got fantastic friends and other writers that I can sort of lean on. And what's been great is that I'm coming slightly later in the year for debuts. One of the things I learned was that mostly debuts are launched in the first sort of half of the year, mostly. And January, February this year was absolutely mad. There was so many books being published, and I'm coming in May. So I've been quite fortunate in that a lot of my sort of writing friends have sort of now been published. And so they understand what the process is and sort of tell me about it and sort of help me out on this sort of road, this sort of last few months to go, which is always the busiest and slightly, most stress-inducing.
And that's it for this week's episode of Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Samuel Burr for coming on the show. The new novel is The Fellowship of Puzzlemakers. It's a lot of fun. I think it's going to be one of those debuts that gathers pace, and then is everywhere. I cannot wait to see what Sam gets up to with his next few novels as well. Now, if you like the show, you make sure you support us over at patreon.com/writers routine. Just a few dollars a month. That helps me keep bringing you these chats as often as I can. On there now, there is a brand new book review, little life update kind of thing, just keeping you across what's happening on the podcast over on our Patreon page. You could also leave us a review however you listen to the podcast. You can get in touch using the contact page at writersroutine.com and by dropping us a follow on X. We are at WritersPod there. There's stuff happening over on TikTok as well, and some stuff, not as much as there probably should be, on Instagram. I will see you in any of those ways, and we'll be back with a brand new guest next week on the podcast. Until then, see you later.